I have moved back to my even lighting scene. Let's give that a render. And you can see that I am back to having just plain old white light. In File, Save Scene As, I will save this as noon light. I personally think that of the three scenes I've asked for, noon is easily the trickiest. Because noon, you get very short shadows, you tend to get a lot of natural light from the sun, and natural light is very blue and very pale. So everything that you do for noon has to be really subtle. Part of that is just that we think of noon as being this really warm time of day and we want to use warm tones. But remember that warm tones of light are actually colder and weaker. So for noon, I want to be using more blues. I still want to bounce that out with some alternating colors, but noon is easily the trickiest. So the first thing that I want to do is take my key light, and again, I'm going to look through it. I've still got my render view open, and the reason for that is that I want to try to have really short shadows. So I might come in here and almost go into fill light territory, where I am shooting from almost directly overhead, and that's going to give me a really short shadow on this light. Back to my perspective view. Along with that, I may need to do something similar with my backlight. And I may need to angle that to an even steeper degree. And because noon has such short shadows, I might even need a second backlight so I can come in and illuminate a little bit of the area inside of the lamps. I'll experiment with that here. Let me pause my render while I do so. I'm simply going to duplicate my backlight. See if that really duplicated. It did. We'll take backlight 2 and move it. In this case, I do want to move in world mode so that I can drag this right across here and rotate over there. And now I will look through selected and see how I've done. Yeah, that's going to shoot straight up into that lamp. That looks pretty good. So let's see what the render looks like. Good, now I'm getting backlighting from both sides. So, I'm going to start my light color with my key light, and at this point I am going to use color temperature, and I'm going to see if I can find a nice, really pale, cold blue. And it looks like that's going to be up around 8,000, and I'm seeing the blue tones mostly after the terminus, where the light is just shading a tiny bit. And I don't want to exaggerate this, I don't want to go too far, I just want to get those little tiny hints of blue. For contrast, I will take my fill light, and remember the fill light should have a very minimal effect on the scene. I'll move it over to the yellow-orange tones, and I will just give it the tiniest hint of yellow. Just the littlest bit. My backlights, I will come in with a blue color. I don't really want to shade into the purples, those are going to get too cold for the light. So I'll come in for a fairly pale blue. And I may give these a slightly heavier tone than the key light so that the rim color turns to a really nice blue. That looks pretty good for the general color tones, but I feel like for noon I need a slightly stronger light. I'm not going to change the intensity of the fill light because that is yellow and I don't really want more yellow in the scene. So I'm going to start with the backlights and see if making the backlights stronger gives me the effect that I'm looking for. So I'll go up to 14 on both of them. And maybe even higher, maybe I will see what 15 looks like here. And that looks like it's a little too strong. So I'll go back down to 14. And then we'll take my key light. It's already at 14 and a half. Let's see what happens if I go up to 15. And that looks nice and bright. Good overhead light. The whites look white. The shadows look cool and blue. And that gives me a pretty good sense of noon lighting. I'm getting a little bit of washout along this rim here, so I might need to go back and tweak that, but for the moment I'm going to keep this because this looks like a really good place for me to go off and have a critique with some of my colleagues. So this is a good place for me to stop for the moment.